My name is Pam Wright. Really glad you're here tonight. It's going to be fun talking with you about the Boundary Waters. I am a wilderness guide in northern Minnesota. Not only do I take people on Boundary Waters canoe trips, but I also get to take them winter camping. I have been exploring and journeying through the Boundary Waters for the past 30 years. I'm also joined tonight by Tim Barton. Tim, do you want to introduce yourself?
Certainly, yeah. I'm Tim. I'm one of the outfitting managers for Piragis Northwoods Company. I also guide for the company here, so I get to take a trip or two in the summer, take folks out into the wilderness. Um, I've been doing this since I was in the womb in one way or another my whole life, so I'm very lucky and very passionate about it. So.
Good. So we're going to start with some of the basics. We're going to cover a lot of things tonight, kind of give you a good overview. Hopefully that it will get you started in your planning. If you've done some Boundary Waters trips, maybe you'll learn something new. At the end, we'll also include our contact information so that you are able to reach out to us if you have questions as you continue to make plans or have questions about renting gear or permits, that sort of thing. So the Boundary Waters, it's vast. It's a 1.1 million acre wilderness in northern Minnesota. It's generally divided into two areas, so the eastern and the western side. As you can see there on the map, it's also covered by different entry points, and there are over 70 entry points in the Boundary Waters. And those are going to become important to you as you plan your canoe trip. Each one of those entry points is given a number and a name, and that will become important when you go to make your reservation for your permit, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the travel is primarily by canoe, although there are hiking trails. But there's a lot of areas to explore. And the gateway communities generally surrounding the Boundary Waters is Ely, Grand Marais, and Tofty. So, quota entry points. Quota day is almost here. Everybody's getting ready to reserve their permits. They will become available next Wednesday on January 28th at 9 a.m. Central Time. You might be starting to think about what permits you would like to get. And they are reserved between May and September 30th. Those are the online permits that we're talking about. And then other times a year, people like to visit the Boundary Waters as well. And in those cases, they're going to get a self-issued permit. Timon, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, just a couple things to remember. Permits, each entry point has a quota, so it allows, up to a certain amount of groups to go in each day. Each group or each permit allows up to 4 canoes and 9 people. So you don't need a permit per day. You don't need a permit per person. You need one permit for a group of up to 9 people. And the only thing that's locked is your start date and your end date. You can certainly change your exit point or exit date at any point, but what can't change is the group leader, the alternates, and the where you go in.
Yeah, somebody had one question that I'm going to answer is which areas are most popular where permits sell out the fastest?
It's a good question. I would say, I mean, I can jump in here. There's some of those entry permits that go extremely quick. Some are great for every group, some are not so great for every group. I think it's more important about what your group is capable of and what they're interested in doing and seeing while they're out there. There's going to be a permit or an entry point that works for everybody, but then there are plenty that don't work for everybody. So, really knowing what you're getting and knowing where you're going is the biggest thing. Um, and then obviously knowing the capabilities and the skills of the people who are on the trip. What I would say is that there's some that go extremely fast. And I can only speak to the West End really, but Mudrow, Moose River North, Indian Sioux, even Lake One has gotten very popular. So if some of those permits are on your list, you'll want to plan ahead. It's not a permit that you can usually get the week of or a day before.
Yep. Yeah, good info. Um, there's always something, and I always say stay flexible because you might be surprised and get into an entry point that you didn't realize was actually a lot cooler than you knew. So We're going to cover some rules and regulations as well, just to think about. The U.S. Forest Service manages the wilderness, and they've put out some rules and regulations to help maintain the solitude as well as minimize impact to the landscape. So, like Tim said, your group max size is 9. You can have up to 4 watercraft. You can rent a 3-person canoe. When you get to camp, you want to be sure to camp on durable surfaces and not make new campsites. Each campsite, which I'll talk about in a little bit, has a latrine, so it's great for using the bathroom. Otherwise, you're encouraged to dig a hole far away from a trail or water source. When you're looking for firewood, only collect dead and down wood about the size of your arm or wrist. And then the U.S. Forest Service has put out newer regulations on food storage, which we're going to cover in just a little bit. And then bathe and wash dishes away from water. That includes soap. So no soaps, even biodegradable soap, can go into the water. Metal and glass containers are not allowed except for the fuel canisters, medicine, or bug spray. Make sure you carry out all garbage, including garbage that you find, and that includes menstrual products. You want to dispose of fish remains about 200 feet away from water or trails. As always, put out your campfire, and then be mindful of your noise because it carries really well across the lake. So we're going to talk about anything else you want to add, Tim?
I was just going to say one thing I always like to remind folks is pay attention to rules that maybe aren't on this list that can happen throughout the year. Fire bans, pay attention for that kind of thing. Also, just check with outfitters or the Forest Service about water levels and upcoming weather and that kind of stuff. That's always really important. I know we chat about that later, but I always pay attention and look for fire ban information and that kind of stuff as well.
Yep, good to know. So for food storage, in the last year, the U.S. Force updated their food storage order, and I have put a link to a list of approved containers. They are encouraging you to either hang your food or put it in one of the approved storage containers. And I have a couple that I'm showing you here. The Earth Sack is a brand that has stuff sacks type that keep out critters. We use them, they've worked pretty well. And the nice thing is they collapse. And then you could also use something like a Bear Vault canister. It's works great, but it's hard-sided, so it's limited on what you can do with it. But um, think about how you're going to store your food and then make sure that you're following the food storage orders. So, how do we hang our food? Tim, do you want to cover that?
Well, obviously, there's a lot of different ways. This is one. There's also some really great resources on the Forest Service website that show multiple ways to do it. But Pam, actually, on the next slide, will show kind of a rope and pulley system. I mean, you can make it as simple or as difficult or as intricate as you want. The goal, though, is 6 feet up and 12 foot. I'm sorry, 12 foot up and 6 feet up from a tree. That's kind of the main goal that you're looking for there. Some areas that can be difficult, especially burn areas or areas where trees are pretty sparse, swampy or rivery areas. So that's what the upside on having like an Ursac or a bear canister of some kind that is bear proof that doesn't necessarily need to be hung. So make sure you have an understanding of the area you're heading into when you're coming up with your bear plan,
Yep. And not all trees are perfect. So I like to practice at home first, so that I'm not spending 2 hours trying to hang something in the woods.
especially when the
Um,
bugs are eating you alive. So
yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
as a guide, we usually have very heavy food packs that are at least 60 pounds, and some of it's two of them that we have to hoist. And so, you want to have your system down so it's not super complicated and hard and you're out there forever. So these are two different ways. The one on the left is kind of that first way where you're throwing it over a branch 6 feet out. It's great when you can find a branch that's perfect like that. Otherwise, I often resort to what's called the laundry line, and that's on the right side where I'm putting my food in between two trees. So you can make a game of it. Somebody had a question. The Ursac does not need to be hung. Technically, no. I have wrapped them and tied them up around trees. They come with a nice tutorial on how to tie them with specific knots. that you use to keep the critters out? Tim, do
Yeah,
you hang
technically,
yours?
I'll usually a best practice for them is that they do stay off the ground. There are some that
Yep.
are Kevlar lined that'll help keep smaller critters and animals out, but at the same time, why risk it? So I always find like a branch, maybe 4 to 6 feet up, that I can kind of hang it to and tie it to. You don't want to make it easy. The downside on the Ursac is the bears can't get into it, but they can certainly destroy whatever is inside. So you don't want to make it easy for them to like run off with it.
Yeah, good
This is
point.
also one of those rules that, they put in place for the last year that they found that bear encounters are down significantly. I don't expect to go away. This
Yeah.
is one of those that I think will stick around. So you should come up with plans for future trips.
Yeah. And we work really hard to like keep our campsites clean and put away food and store food and hang it. And I will say that, and I've been lucky enough that in 30 years I've yet to see a bear. I've heard them and I've heard other campsites banging pots and pans. But so far we've managed to avoid a meeting, a meetup. Somebody asked, are food storage containers or hanging required when traveling with summer camps? We use Duluth packs and wrap them in tarps and our cook kit to alert us in case of a bear. So I will answer that. I also travel with Duluth type packs. They're actually cook custom sewing canoe packs, but they're the same. And we hang those as well, just like you saw in the picture. So hanging is the way to go, per the regulations.
And unless you have your food inside of an Ursac, inside of a Duluth pack of some kind, then it needs to be hung that 6 feet out and 12 feet up. So
Yeah.
make sure that you're following those rules, because I think that their understanding effort goes a long way with the Forest Service. I don't want to speak to them, but if you're making a good effort of making sure that your bear, compliance with that, I think it goes a long way.
Yeah, for sure. This is just a quick example. I wish I could actually demonstrate it for you because it's really fun. But I use what's called a 3-to-1 Z pulley system. I needed something that I or maybe a few of us could lift on our own or pull on our own. I'm not a super like physically strong person, so I wanted to have something. So this is just an example. You can Google it online. There's examples of how to use this system, but I bring quite a bit of rope, as you can see. It probably adds like 5 pounds to my weight, but it's really easy to set up. If I can find the right trees, I can probably have everything rigged to go within about 10 minutes or less. So that's my little plug for that. Any other questions that we haven't answered yet? I don't think so.
Good.
Okay, we're going to move on to navigation. Oh, good question. Does this area have both black and brown bears?
No, just black bears. Thankfully, we don't have to deal with brown bears or grizzlies. I've taken several folks out from out west who are way more jumpy in the wilderness than I fully understood until they kind of explained the difference. But yeah, no, black bears up here, which tend to be more afraid of humans than anything else. They scare off pretty easily if it comes down to it. But we should still do our best to mitigate any kind of encounter.
Yeah, consider yourself lucky if you see something big out there. So for navigation, there's a couple of things that you can do to navigate. There's no signage or anything in the wilderness, and so it's going to be important to figure out how you want to navigate. Um, and so I like to use topographic maps. And a couple of them I will talk a little bit about more later. But when you go to look at a topographic map, just know that they are different sized scales. And so that means that some are kind of zoomed in and some are sort of a bird's eye view. When you start to familiarize yourself with the topographic maps, you want to look for a few different things. And this is an example that I zoomed in on one of my topographic maps. Up on the far right, you're going to see the name of the entry point, and this particular entry point is called Lake 1 or number 30. So, like I said earlier, all the entry points have a name, all the entry points have a number. So, when I go to reserve my permit, if I want to go to Lake One, when I go into the reservation system, and I suggest you look at it before you look at it for the first time on permit day, There will be a drop-down menu of all the entry points. And if you're going for an overnight paddle, that's what you're going to choose. On the map as well is a wilderness boundary line in black and red that also includes up further north, you'll see it up where the Canadian border meets Minnesota. The red dots are campsites. Campsites are primitive on purpose, and they only have a fire grate, a latrine, and some primitive log seating. They're varied in size and characteristics, which makes them interesting. They're not all alike. Some will fit larger groups better than others, so just be aware of that as you're exploring around the lake. And then in the middle, you can see I've highlighted 15 RD, which stands for rods. All portage trails are measured in rods. One met level of guideline is that 320 rods is equal to a mile, 180 rods is equal to half a mile, and then if I think I got it right, 80 rods is equal to about a quarter mile. One thing to be aware of, just because you see 15 rods, don't necessarily think that it's an easy portage. It's going to be helpful to kind of look at the contour lines or ask outfitters. Some short portages can be really hard. Maybe they go straight up and down, and other portages can be just long and easy and fairly flat.
Yeah, some
Anything,
even mile-long portages can be very
yeah,
relaxing. As a matter of fact,
yeah,
the longer they are, rarely are they straight uphill that whole time. They tend
yeah.
to be a little bit more relaxed as far as that goes. But some of my least favorite portages have been 35 rods, but they're straight uphill.
Yeah.
One thing I always like to remind folks too, each entry point, the Forest Service gave each entry point a name and a number, but they do not use those numbers on the reservation booking side. So
Oh,
no idea why, but if you're booking a permit on recreation.gov, it will not say number 30 Lake One. It will say Lake One. A couple of the times that can get kind of tricky is if you're booking something that has like Moose River North or Moose River South, both of which are great permits, but not necessarily one might not be the trip that you're looking for. So make sure that you know the exact name of the permit before you go on to rec.gov to add it to your cart because you don't want to end up with the wrong permit. There's also some permits that do have restrictions. Most of them just tend to be like you can't camp on a certain lake or you only can camp at a certain lake. So make sure that if you're booking a restricted permit, you're aware of what that is.
yeah. Good details to know. And I forgot that they didn't include the numbers. I always think
Yeah,
they do. So
never understand that, but they do not.
good to know. So familiarize yourself, get a couple of topographic maps. There's many good ones out there that we will recommend in a minute, but familiarize yourself so that you kind of start to understand sort of the lay of the land. You can also, one thing when I was starting to uh, do Boundary Waters trips, I joined an orienteering club near where I live. And so that really helped me learn how to use a map and compass. So, really good skill to have. GPS is fine for a backup, but map and compass don't fail. So we're going to talk a little bit about map and satellite communicators. We suggest you start out with a good set of planning maps, like National Geographic. They have maps for the Eastern region, or the Western region, and you can also buy it as a bundle. Those are nice as you plan. You get a really, really good sense of the region, like where to start and where to end. And that will help you determine what type of permit you want to pull. Top of map Topographic maps that we recommend, but these aren't the only ones, are Mackenzie, W.A. Fisher, Voyager Maps, and True North Map Co. You can also there's online route planning services that you can use. The one we like is Paddle Planner. Paddle Planner was designed specifically for the Boundary Waters and Quetico, and you can look at campsites, measure routes, get information from other people who've been to that area, which is really handy. And then finally, it's always a good idea to carry some sort of satellite communicator if you can. You can also rent them from outfitters. I personally carry a Garmin InReach, which pairs with my phone, so I can text at home and I can look at the weather. Some people use Zolio. Many of you might know now with newer mobile devices, you can actually connect to satellite on your mobile device. So you might want to look into that and see if that's a feature that you have on your mobile device. Anything else to add, Tim?
Yeah, I always like to remind folks that there's some great apps on phones that allow for mapping and to download maps and that kind of stuff. But I personally would never go into the wilderness without having a paper map, whether it's a backup or your initial your trip routing map, because electronics can fail, batteries can die. There's a lot of things that can happen out there. I always bring a backup. A map per boat is a pretty good gauge to go off of, so that you've got multiple people planning the routes or knowing where you're at. So if for some reason you're unable to continue, they are. So having that kind of thing goes a long way. I love Paddle Planner. We use it every day here at Piragis. One thing I always like to remind folks, because it does have like star ratings for campsite. It has information on portage difficulty, which can be very helpful, but you should always take that with a grain of salt, because one person's 5-star campsite could be another person's 1-star campsite. Sometimes when I see one of my favorite campsites being like a 2 or a 3, it just makes my day, because that means someone else isn't going to stay at it. But just keep that in mind, that you're paying attention and having conversations with outfitters or Forest Service or people who have been in that area, so you kind of know about specific campsites.
Yeah, that's good to know. And when I guide, I often have people that want to learn how to navigate, and I will always carry two sets of topographic maps, and usually by different brands because sometimes there's differences, or like I said, one scale is different than the other. And then the people that I'm with have the opportunity to learn how to navigate in a safe setting because I am their backup. So it's kind of fun to have actually more than one map. I mark up my maps, I make notes on my maps, I mark places to fish on my map, so it's very helpful to have. We have a few questions, additional questions in chat. Tim, do you want to start with one of those?
Yeah, the first thing was whether or not food needs to be hung all day or just at night. It needs to be hung when it's basically not in use, is kind of how the Forest Service would describe it. Now, does that mean that every time that you finish dinner, you have to put it right away? Not necessarily, but it means that if you're away from it, that for any period of time, that it should probably be hung and away from bears.
Yeah, for sure. When we go out for the day, like if we go to explore some pictographs or want to go to explore some other lakes, we either take the food pack with, but more often we hang it before we leave. So anytime it's out of sight is kind of our rule of thumb. It's going to be hung up. So,
Yep. Uh,
um, go
the
ahead.
other question was, have wolves been introduced to the area? If they was, it was a very long time ago. That we've been introduced more recently than wolves were. So
Yeah. Somebody said our bear canisters okay. We talked a little bit about that earlier. There are certain types of bear canisters that are fine that are approved by the Interagency Grizzly Bear, I think it's Association.
yeah,
Did I get that?
it was close.
And
It's close enough anyway. So
and yes, so the U.S. Forest Service also has a the link on their website as well. So if you put like Google food storage order approved canisters, you will find them. But yeah, Bear Vault is one brand. There's another one that I can't think of that's black
there's
colored.
there's also a misnomer, like the blue bear
Yes.
barrels that people have used for decades, and assuming those are not bear proof. They're not approved to be left out without hanging. So you do need to hang them. They are critter resistant, they're water resistant, they're still functional, but they don't provide that protection that you need to be bear proof. So they still need to be hung. And you're not alone in being able to find that perfect tree. That is a tough find. And like I was saying earlier, effort goes a long way. Do your best.
Yeah. Yep. Somebody says, any guidance for hanging the food pack on the short campsite trees? We've had to do a PCT diagonal hang from a stumpy tree in the site out over the bluff rocks just to get it higher. Yeah, I've had to be very, very creative sometimes. If I have a lot of like, for example, like what is it, black spruce or white spruce, or that's the scrappy trees, I often do what's called a laundry line. So I have put one rope up in one tree. throw it across and have the rope across the way. So it literally looks like a long laundry line with the bag hanging in the middle. So it takes some practice, but I've been able to hang in some pretty crazy situations. We're going to jump into canoes and packing and food and all of that kind of good stuff. This is a picture of a Kevlar canoe. It's the type of canoes that are most often used in the Boundary Waters. When I first started going to the Boundary Waters, we rented it, and then eventually bought one. But many outfitters rent these, three-seaters, four-seaters, two-seaters. And so they're very great and work ideally for the Boundary Waters. It's ultra light, but it's also kind of ultra special. So you have to be careful with them. The parts of the canoe are a good idea to familiar yourself with, even if you've done a little bit of paddling. It's just going to increase your comfort and joy, and you will continue to get along with your canoe mate. So the front is called the bow. You can see it there on the left, and I know it looks wrong, but it's right. It's the angle of my boat in the picture. The stern is the back. So front and back or bow and stern is right. There's usually a couple of webbed or plastic type composite seats in them. The metal along the edges is called the gunwales. And the middle bars that go across the boat that help support it for strength are the thwarts. Those you will get familiar with when you go to portage your canoe and bring your canoe up onto the campsite. Also, outfitters can show you how to portage a canoe, and it's really helpful to learn so that you don't struggle on portage trails because portage trails are rough and rugged, and some are easy and some are tough. So it's good to know how to portage that boat. And then in the middle, we also have the yoke and the yoke pads, and the yoke pads are important. While you will feel that pressure and the weight of the boat, the yoke pads make it a much more comfortable experience. So if you rent from an outfitter or stop in and talk to an outfitter to find out how to best care for these boats, which I know you have a few probably thoughts on, Tim.
Yeah. No, so we at Piragis, we rent out all Kevlar canoes. So ultralight Kevlar tandem canoes tend to range between 41 and 46 pounds. So that allows you to travel that much further without having to work near as hard. But like Pam was saying, it does mean you got to be a lot more careful with it. So you can't really run them aground, watch for rocks, parallel up to shore. You're getting wet feet doing a boat like this. Um, there are some canoes that tend to be a little bit more durable but heavier. Aluminum, Royal X hard plastic, T4Max. Some of those boats you'll still see in the wilderness, and they have some upside as well. The downside is you're usually doubling or getting close to doubling the weight. So you're going from 41 to around 78 pounds for a 17-foot Kevlar canoe in aluminum. And when you're throwing it over your back 6, 8, 10 times a day, it really can make a difference. So, choose what's best for you, choose what's best for your group. We can certainly help you choose what's best, but at Paragus, unfortunately, we just have the ultralight Kevlar. So
Yep. And when we portage the canoes, I talked a little bit a minute ago about that we're really careful with them. They scratch easily, they can get damaged easily. So when we get to the end of the portage trail, we put the boat right in the water if we can. And then when we get to the following portage trail, we do what's called wet entry, wet exit. So the boat goes in the water wet and the boat comes out of the water wet. So we're not dragging it up on shores, dragging it down portage trails, that sort of thing. Somebody asked
yeah,
about the
what do we
back
recommend
support.
for back support? Yeah, I mean, I get that one a lot. If you're fishing all day, it can be really nice to have something to kind of lean back on. A Crazy Creek makes a pretty decent lightweight option. There are some more kind of heavy duty GSI back supports that'll attach to most canoes, most canoe seats. As a rule, while you're paddling, you really shouldn't be leaning back as it is. You should be kind of straight up and down. And so posture is really important for paddle days, but at the same time, a Crazy Creek, which a lot of companies will rent. I think for us they're like $4 a day, but for a pretty nominal fee, you can go buy one for like 45 or $50. But that certainly can help, especially if you're fishing or relaxing in the boat a lot.
Yeah, I agree with Tim. My form tends to fail me, and my core isn't as engaged when I have a chair. So I prefer no chair, but I can see the benefits of it for sure. And we do have people that bring it. So what should we pack and how to pack? And there's a lot of ways to do this. The biggest thing is just to be mindful of weight, but also really mindful of safety. So safety should be your priority. Um, and then consider how many days you're going, the time of year you're going. All of those things are going to play into how and what you pack. And I highly recommend that you practice with any gear that you have. So before you even go on your trip, practice with your stoves, your water filters. Test your tent to make sure it's not leaking, that you've got all the poles. Do a dry run in your backyard. It's a good way to save yourself a lot of headache later. Start with your own gear. You can also rent gear. The outfitters in northern Minnesota have a great selection of gear that you can rent all of it, or you can do a la carte. And then, of course, you can borrow and buy used gear. Um, Pack all the gear into canoe packs using waterproof liners and bags. You can also use backpacks. That is fine. What's nice about canoe packs is they are made for the canoes. They are also large, and they have really nice supportive waist belt and strapping that makes it more of a comfortable experience. But if you don't have those, that's fine. Use what you have. Pack for the conditions you expect to encounter. Sometimes there are cool storms in the summer. That's not uncommon. So pack good, reliable rain gear, and that's a jacket and bottom. So they always double as warmth. If it's cool in the evening, but it's not rainy, you can throw on your rain gear and it'll keep you nice and warm. Especially May and June, it can get quite cold. I've had trips in May that are into like low 30s. And so I was really glad that I had that rain gear. Make sure you keep those loose items contained. So especially at portage trails, when you're unloading your gear at portage trails or reloading your gear, try not to have a yard sale. Keep everything clipped, packed, all nice together. You're going to be uh, less likely to forget it. Tarps, I always have a tarp. I have a system that I use that I can rig really quickly. And it's great for shade as well. Don't overpack the canoe. Sometimes I see people and they've got stuff sticking every which way, and the person in the back can barely see the person in the front. It's kind of a recipe, very entertaining for those of us on the water, but kind of a recipe for disaster. You can use bungees to clip items like paddles or your life jackets to the thwarts or the gunnels or the seats of the canoe. And always wear your life jacket. I'll probably say it again at some point. We have a just a rule that it's always worn, and I like to clip it to the canoe and portaging, and then always carry a first aid and repair kit. And check those things. Look for expired stuff. Make sure you know how to use all the stuff that's in that kit.
All that is great stuff to remember. One thing I always like to tell folks too is, clutter tends to really slow you down. So on travel days, especially, efficiency can really just help go get you through the day. So, the last thing you want to do is go all the way across the portage and realize that someone forgot a water bottle. So carabiners, these portage packs are really great because they can stuff everything you need into them. So take advantage of that. Rain gear, extremely important, whether it's July, August, September, all year round. Make sure that you're bringing a pair of pants and a jacket. You don't want to go out there with a poncho. That's not going to cut it. There are some obviously really high grade rain gear, but you don't need to do that. But you also just don't want the cheapest thing in the world that's just going to fall apart the minute you put it on. Um, yeah, so gear is really important. It doesn't have to break the bank, but at the same time, you should make sure to have stuff that works.
Yeah, for sure. So you can kind of see in these pictures that I'm just showing, I like to zip our life jackets to the seats of our canoes. They actually don't impede our vision. And then that way we don't forget them. Some people like to wear their life jackets across the portages, whatever works for you. The biggest thing is no loose items. And then you can kind of see our neatly piled, which isn't always that neat, at a portage to try to make sure we're keeping all of our gear together. And I found some really nice fishing rods, I will say. Picture of a campsite. Again, you're camping on durable surfaces. Most campsites will have a few tent pads. Hammocks will also work if you're into hammocking on many campsites. Just be aware as you look at campsites that some will fit bigger groups and others will fit smaller groups. They're all first come, first serve. Everybody on your permit has to camp at the same site. You can't split up and have somebody across the lake on one campsite and then you're on another. And really good campsites hopefully have a good setup for hanging tarps, but I have tarp where I've got a lot of rope so I can hang up in kind of crazy situations even when the trees aren't perfect. So, any questions?
Tarp, first aid kit, those are the kind of things that you're going to want with you all the time. If you're out for a day trip, if you're just paddling around, or the four things I always make sure that are with me when I'm out on a day trip, if I'm away from camp, I always have some sort of tarp. I always have some sort of rain gear because you just never know. And I always have a first aid kit and a water filter. So that in for some reason, if the wind kicked up and you're unable to get back from camp or a million other things can happen, that you have kind of the essentials to get you through.
Yep, for sure. I always say I have enough with me to spend an uncomfortable night in the woods.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
yep. So I'm just showing here how to pack your boat. Try to keep that gear low. There's lots of different configurations for packing your boat, but you want it balanced so that the front isn't tipped way up or the back isn't tipped way up. You kind of want it just right. And make sure that I'll probably share it later, but you only want to paddle in the conditions that you have the skills for. So if in doubt, hang out at camp and play games and eat food. So.
One thing I mean, trim is one of those things in a canoe that can really have an effect on how well you travel. So wind and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of hard to explain all that right now, but it's something that you should pay attention of how you pack your canoe can actually have a really big effect as to how it travels.
Yeah, so if something seems off with your boat, maybe check how you packed it. So we're going to talk about food now, which is an important part of the wilderness experience. One thing I will say about food is you can keep it as simple as you want, or you can be really fancy and make like sushi or whatever you want to do. But regardless of what you decide, make sure you prepare as much as you can in advance. The more you can do on the front end, the easier it is on trail, and the more time you have to relax or fish or swim. Plan for a mix of maybe fresh, dehydrated, or store-bought food. I like to just start with my local grocery store and find things rice-based, pasta-based, couscous, things that can be made that are hearty for one pot is kind of the easiest way to go. And then you could add like some bread or crackers with that. Make sure you label and pack each meal in its own bag. So each of my breakfast is put in a Ziploc and I label that breakfast. It's not complicated, but then I know it's going to be organized when I go to grab it. And then all my breakfasts I put in a yellow bag, all my lunches I put in a green bag, and all of my dinners I put in a blue bag. And they're just stuff sacks with zippers. However you want to organize it, it's helpful to have some sort of organized setup so that it makes it easier and less frustrating, especially if you're dealing with cold weather and you want to get food going or something on the stove. Um, you can cook over the fire grate. A lot of people do that and really enjoy it. Just know that it takes longer and a little more preparation, and conditions may not always be ideal for that. So I always carry a stove as a backup, and I mostly, primarily as a guide, cook over the stove. Actually, I have a couple of stoves. It's just easier, it's efficient, they're reliable. I know what to expect, but we will occasionally cook over the fire. And we talked about food storage systems. Make sure you keep a clean campsite. I have run into people who've had bear problems and they're like, well, I left the dish soap out, or I left a bag of coffee grounds out. Like, put it all away. All the smellies go up into the food sack. And for my groups, or when I'm out there, it includes sunblock, lip balm, deodorant if you bother bringing that. Anything that smells other than like your own personal medications, we just hang it. So that way it's kind of an all or none for us, and you're not having to pick through, oh, is it this or that? Because bears will, and animals, and even mice are probably the worst, will go for it. Your dish cleaning kit, you want to toss all soap, including biodegradable, back into the wood. So back by the latrine, there's going to be a little trail to your latrine. Throw your dish soap back beyond that. Don't forget snacks and beverages. They're a huge part of the enjoyment of wilderness. So sometimes we make desserts, but coffee, tea, cocoa, ciders always enjoyed. And gas or glass and cans are not allowed, but the exception of those fuel canisters and bug spray. And so we have some food here for your enjoyment of some stuff we make. We like a lot of fresh and hearty and filling. But like I said, it doesn't have to be fancy.
Yeah, one thing I always like to remind folks is your menu should reflect the trip that you're doing. So if you're on a trip where you're moving every day, 6 hours a day, and you've got to get from A to B to C, you shouldn't plan a wild rice soup. That's going to take a long time. Those are the kind of trips where summer sausage cheese, everybody gets just your hunk. If you're traveling a lot, make sure that you're packing more freeze dried options or more options that are quicker to cook or to eat while on the go. If you're having a base camp and that kind of stuff, you can certainly bring a few more of those fresh items, the stuff that might keep a little bit better, but always pay attention to temperatures. Some things don't keep very well out there. So make sure when you're planning it, it is not just what looks good, it also is what makes sense for your trip plan.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thinking about those temperatures and stuff. Thankfully, it is amazing what you can bring and what we've pulled off. And dehydrated meals have actually come a long ways. And it's very easy to take a dehydrated meal, even doctor it up with something fresh, or throw some, dehydrated meat into that. So test stuff out at home before you go. Make sure you like it. But you can do tacos and pizzas and soups and just about anything that you put your mind to. Sometimes we do fancy desserts like donuts and s'mores. And other times, I think, Tim, you mentioned yesterday that chocolate goes a long way.
Oh yeah, a chocolate bar at the end of the trip, especially if you don't want to do dishes for dessert, then that's the dream. And as a guide, it's one of my favorite things to put out there. And I still look like a great cook. It's amazing how that works.
Yeah. And we have a designated snack bag. I can't remember what color that bag is at the moment, but it's designated. It's got savory and sweet snacks. And each morning we set it out, and we always tell people grab 3 or 4 snacks, shove them in your life jacket. That way you have stuff, accessible all day long because you're not pulling out your food pack necessarily. And it's a nice way to, keep the energy up as well. So chocolate, we have one bag in that snack bag that is just chocolate. So definitely
Yeah,
important.
and James mentioned that portage packs, not compartmentalized.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good point. But you're making a good point about organization with your food. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner all having a different color, a snack bag having a different color. There's no reason you can't do that with your portage pack as well. I have a bunch of ditty bags and zip sacks that I know exactly which one is what's in each one. Find a way to color code that for yourself because it can make a big difference for looking for the thing that you need. So.
Yeah, it can be as simple as if you have a bunch of stuff sacks, you can just throw a piece of tape or duct tape on them to identify what's breakfast, what's lunch, what dinner, and that's the only bag then you're grabbing out. Don't forget your like oils or butters. Coconut oil packs and travels really well. Olive oil does too, and they both add a lot of calories for lightweight. They come in little single serve packets if you want. So stuff like that, like your foil, anything else that you think you will need to cook. I also love lightweight camp tables. They're one of my favorite things. Squatting gets old. I bring a chair too, but squatting gets old after a while, and the tables are really nice to have. Plus, you can play games on them. Stoves, there's a lot of choices. The ones that we use primarily are the ones on the far left. That is a MSR Whisper Light, but I keep meaning to swap out that picture. I prefer the Dragonfly is the brand, because you can control simmer and boiling where the Whisper Light, it just boils. And the MSR container there is reusable, which I love. So you're not worrying about having to collect a bunch of canisters and recycle those. And it also holds white gas. And the nice thing about that is it tolerates really cold temperatures. So I actually use that type of stove year round, and it's really light, reliable, and easy. Well, once you learn how to use it, it's easy to use. There's also backpacking stoves with canisters, and those have pluses and minuses. They're going to be a little bit tippier because they're higher off the ground, but if it's only maybe a couple of you camping, it's not a big deal. And if that's what you have, then use it. Just be careful with stoves. The Coleman is kind of the traditional stove. Those could be best used for like if you're going to stay at a campsite and you're going to base camp. Otherwise, they're pretty heavy and clunky to use as far as like weight. And a jet boil is just another option that I put on there. That's just an efficient stove for a few people. But the one on the left, I bring a couple of those, and those are nice for groups of at least four or more people, and they work really well.
So I tend to do most of my cooking over the fire. I like spending the time doing it, and I also like going to get firewood and the like. But I always carry a stove like this, whether it's just to boil water for some of those quick meals, or I just don't like wait for coffee in the morning. And I'm always gonna have a fire going, but at the same time, I'd like to get that coffee moving. So
Yeah. How to deal with water and drinking water and that sort of thing. Thankfully, the Boundary Waters is fairly clean. However, it's a good idea to have some filters with you. When we travel, we always have two types of filters. We have one that we use while we're traveling, and then one that we use for while we're at camp. So the one that we use at camp is the one on the far left. I know it's not very big, but it's a platypus gravity filter system. And it uses gravity just like you think to clean the water. So on the left side is the dirty water. So you scoop your dirty water out of the lake. And then there is a filter in the middle that filters the water, and then the far right bag is the clean water. And it's very easy to use. It's not a super cheap system, but if you take care of it, there are ways to clean it. You can back flush it. And it comes in 4 liters and 6 liter sizes and possibly some others, but it's my favorite thing to use in camp because you can just let it do its work while you go do other work. And you can just create lots of volumes of water very efficiently and very quickly without having to do much work. There are the little backpacking type of filters that are okay if there's a small group of you. Generally, I only use them if I'm hiking in the Boundary Waters. The Boundary Waters actually does have backpacking trails. And the other filter I bring while we're traveling is that pump filter in the middle, some sort of a pump. It's easy, it's kind of easy to use, it packs well. Or sometimes I'll bring a Pen, which is that bottom one. It uses UV ray to kill the bad things. Um, and those are kind of the filters that I use. So for sure, the gravity filter and either a Pen or a pump. The drawback of the Pen is it uses battery, so there's always possibility it could fail.
Anytime I have a group of four or more people, I'm always carrying a gravity filter, just because the amount of time that it takes to pump 4 liters of water plus what you would normally need. So I'm always carrying one of those gravity bags. They're not the cheapest thing in the world, but they are fully functional. And the one you see there on the left, the platypus, those filters last a very long time, especially if you pull water from a good source, from the middle of the lake, not with a bunch of particulates in it. They do back flush, so you can get a lot of life out of those filters. The Sawyer's work as well. There's a lot of stuff like backpacking stuff that translates well, but this platypus is a really great system or something like it. Iodine, as someone just mentioned, is actually a really good choice just to have it, but it does take a long time. It also leaves kind of a not the best taste in the water. So it's a good, like an emergency option, but it's not something that would be my first choice.
Yeah. And I do see a couple of other questions that we'll get to in a minute. I want to cover fire management here really quick. You can literally pick sticks off the ground and you don't have to saw anything. Again, you always want to use dead and down wood. We're not going to be sawing trees or sawing live anything. But if you go a little bit back and you do, create a little effort, sometimes campsites are a little picked over, but if you like follow along the lake shore or back into the woods just a little bit, you'll find dead and down wood. I carry a couple of pruning saws that are collapsible, and so they're just very easy pretty safe to use. There's a one there on the top that you can see. I like to have multiple pairs of gloves or fire gloves for different uses or other people. Hatchet, we discourage to some degree unless you really know how to use it. Generally, people just get in trouble with those. It's just showing you that something I bring because I like to limb stuff when I'm processing it. But generally, a pruning saw or a Sven saw or something like that is going to work just fine for your needs.
Yeah, hatchets are one of those things I usually only carry in shoulder seasons when fire is that much more important and getting heat. So having something to limb or something to split. But for the most part, I rarely carry them. As an outfitter, I've seen plenty of trips waylaid by folks who buy a brand new hatchet or an axe, thinking this is it, my one chance to use it, and it doesn't always end well. So if you are carrying one, if you know how to, if you're bringing it, make sure that you know how to use it safely.
Yeah. And the foldable saw, pruning saw that I use, somebody asked, yeah, is a silky. So
Yep.
great saws, very reliable. And I have a sleeve that I put it in to help protect it as well and protect the rest of my gear.
Since I
Um,
do most of my cooking over the fire, I like to have a little bit hardier, a little bit bigger saw. I carry an Agua Canyon with a 21-inch blade. It folds into a bow saw, and I really like that. But it's still extremely lightweight, very compact, and that's kind of the biggest thing you should be looking for.
yep. A couple of things we want to cover on safe wilderness travel, and then we're going to jump into some more of these questions here that we haven't answered. As always, wear a life jacket regardless of your swimming abilities. I know there's plenty of people that don't, but they're made so comfortably now. The ones we use have pockets, and so that's for your snacks. So, on my trips, I have a rule wear life jackets. You need to decide that for your trip, but you should always have a life jacket in the boat for every person. You never want to run rapids. That's what portage trails are for. A lot of the portage trails go alongside rapids or they go across land. Some are really scenic and you don't want to miss out on that experience. Plus, you never know, rapids are changing with water levels, so it's not worth the risk. You don't want to paddle in conditions beyond your skill level. So if the wind is kicking up, if you see somebody out there, that doesn't mean you have to be out there too. So if you're unsure, the best is just to hang tight in camp. You can wait a couple hours. I've sat at the end of portage trails when the wind kicked up and we sat there for an hour, ate snacks, played games until the wind died down, and then we got on the water. So you don't have to rush it all. There's no hurry. You'll get to where you need to be. Always check the weather. I like to check the weather before my trip and after the trip just to kind of see how things are trending. Watch the skies when you're out there. Storms can kick up, wind can kick up. Allow enough time for travel. Yesterday, I think we talked about that most new groups, beginner groups, will travel between 1 to 2 miles an hour. Sometimes there's many times we have to do what's called double portaging. So you're getting some of your gear over the portage trail, you walk back, pick up more gear, and take it across. And so that takes up a little more time. So just give yourself more time for everything, setting up camp, figuring things out. It'll be more safe, you'll enjoy it more. Honestly, assess the skills and experience and fitness and the abilities of your entire group. I know that's a mouthful, but assess your group. So just make sure that you're thinking about the comfort and safety for everybody. So if you're not sure, plan something more conservative. You can always do day trips to places. Think about taking a wilderness first aid class that gives you the help to know how to assess risks and manage those risks. We talked about map and compass and satellite communicators. Give those animals plenty of space. Consider yourself lucky if you see a moose or a bear or a wolf. They're all amazing creatures. Don't feed the chipmunks, otherwise, they will never let you be. Get to shore as soon as you see thunder and lightning. If it gets bad, we get back into the woods and we crouch down and spread out. It's kind of the safest place to be. Carry emergency gear on day trips. Tim mentioned what to bring. Always, you can reach out to the ranger station or any outfitter. They have great resource for updates and closures. And then let somebody know where you are going when you plan to be out of the woods, if you're starting at a certain entry point, if you're exiting at a certain uh, entry point. So safety first.
Yeah, a couple things on that. Life jackets always. they're keep you warm too, especially in the shoulder season. There's a lot of upside for that. I always carry a NOAA weather radio for a lot of reasons, but just so you have a better grasp on what's coming the next day, that can be really helpful. It can help you change your plan as needed. So,
Yeah. Somebody asked, do different parts of the BWCA have different character? Can you describe
oh,
some of the unique areas of the BWCA?
yeah,
Yes.
no, of course. So I always like to think, the further south you are on there, there's some swampy river areas. That's where the Quishue River starts and all that kind of stuff. But it's not like it's just all muddy swamps all the time. There's a lot of character, a lot of, rock features and all that kind of stuff. The further east you go and the further northeast you go, you get those kind of east to west lakes, those really deep water lakes that are draining into Superior there. Those tend to have a little more topography, a little bit more up and down, and a little bit more rocky, some clear water. My favorite part of the wilderness is probably northwest in the Moose River, Lac La Croix area, because it's got a really good mix of both. It's part of that Canadian Shield, so lots of really phenomenal rock features. You've just got really beautiful waterfalls and large sections of water too, which I really appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah, though, and you made a good point. So there is some variation. It's all really beautiful and all worth
Gorgeous.
experiencing. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's River Lake sections. There's, up along the border, there's some really cool waterfalls to check out. Also, throughout the Boundary Waters, there are pictographs. You want to leave those alone, but they add to the history and character. I always really encourage people to review and look at the history and the geology of the area. There is evidence of indigenous people traveling, living through, and it's still culturally important to indigenous communities. And so you will see that in certain places if you look carefully. But yeah, the characteristic, the boreal forest, the the Boundary Waters is part of the Canadian Shield, and so it's very iconic with islands, big slabby rocks. You're going to see a lot of flora that is more native to like southern Canada and that sort of thing. So it's a mixed hardwood forest with a boreal forest in it. So, learn about the history, learn about the flora and fauna before you go so that you can have a more engaged experience.
As far as pack crafts are concerned, I think pack crafts are built for just something different, where you're flying in or getting dropped in or a million other things. I can probably count on one hand the amount of time that I've actually seen them in this wilderness. I can't say because I've never tried it. I can't really speak to the disadvantages, and maybe it's a misconception, but my assumption is that they don't have the same rigidity. That you would find with like something with a V-shaped hull or something like that, or a diamond shaped hull. So that is my assumption. But to be honest, we don't see a lot of those. I think you'll see probably these days 60 to 70% Kevlar, and then the other 30% aluminum and Royal X.
Yeah. Once in a while you see those outliers. Like I did see somebody with a paddleboard, but you take into consideration, are you going to have to portage this thing and how will you do it? And what if the wing kicks up and what if it pops a hole or whatever? So anyway, yeah, good answer to that. Somebody asked, is there a sweet spot for timing? We're almost done, but is there a sweet spot for timing with no bugs but not freezing? The answer is yes, and I'm not going to tell you. Just
I will.
kidding.
It's the end of August. It's early September. That's your best bet. But you also run the risk. And I was going to say this back a little while ago. Just because it's August doesn't mean you can't have 40 degrees. That's a real possibility. So, don't just show up in t-shirts and a sweat and shorts for your trip. Make sure you're paying attention to the 10-day forecast before you show up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can have no bugs in great weather in May, or you can have bugs, but generally shoulder seasons, less bugs, generally speaking, or winter. Yeah, somebody said winter, January, definitely no bugs. But yeah, late August, September is a great time. There's can be some sweet spots in early May, but the water's cold, so you have to be more careful. But thanks for all the questions. If anybody has a couple more questions, you can pop them in there before we wrap it up. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was really fun to have you all here and to hear all the questions. Best of luck with your planning. I've put out our contact info there, so feel free to reach out to either Tim or I. We love talking about this stuff. So if you have questions about gear or routes or entry points or anything as you continue to plan, just pop us an email or stop in and see Tim when you're up in Ely,
Yeah.
or send him an email. And please follow SaveTheBoundaryWaters.org, where there is also other resources for planning not only a summer trip, but we also have resources there for planning a winter camping trip.
One thing I'll say, permits open up to the public in a week on January 28th at 9 a.m. Central. So if you have dates set and you're interested in getting some of those high demand permits, make sure that you have a plan to either book your own permit or speak with an outfitter. We're here 9 to 5 daily at Piragis. We're happy to answer any questions you have. And make sure you call your senators, especially if you're out of the state of Minnesota. Let's do our best to protect this wonderful place.
Yes, and no big updates on the border crossing situation. If you Google, there's actually a lot of news on it. The basic thing is those with current RABC or remote area border crossing permits are still allowed to use them. However, they are going to do an updated system come September of this year, where it's going to be some sort of like a call-in system. So just keep watching the news for that. And so
We're
that
still
is
waiting. Yeah, we
status.
just don't have a lot of information on that yet. I'll be
Yeah.
interested to see what happens and just keep your ears up. So
Yeah, sounds good. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
thanks so much.